Good morning, Austin. Early riser.
Always. It's that's the thing with it being school holidays. It's great. I can just get on and do it. I don't have to do the school run. So yeah.
I dash back from the school run normally to get here for 9 to do the reminder, send out the reminder. So yeah, it's.
Yeah. I was going to say, was it you I was having a discussion with about webinars after the reopening last week, or someone else? Because I had a discussion with someone last week about what the timing would be for the ideal timing for webinars after hospitality reopening.
Yes, we did have that sort of conversation. Yeah, it's
because my wife started doing them for schools during when they were in lockdown, and then they all shifted them to like the late afternoon, evening. But I had a discussion with several people actually about what's the best time given the prevalence of 10 o'clock meetings in hotels.
Yeah, don't know. When I first started the forum, about a couple of sessions in, when it was getting busier, I did ask people preferences, and at the time it ended up being sort of, there wasn't much thing. But now we're getting into operational times. We might have to think about timing as far as when's the best time to do them. But yeah, we'll see.
11 o'clock coffee, 10:30 coffee,
possibly.
I'm just trying to think. Yeah, no one has the answer.
No, it's just try and see. Good morning, everybody. Good morning, Barry. Morning, Gavin, Ben, Neil.
Good morning.
Good morning, Robin.
Matthew.
Morning.
Can't miss you today.
Hopefully not.
How is everybody with reopening? Anybody had any news from any clients or anything as far as how if them opening up?
I think it looks very different in London to maybe the countryside.
Yeah.
I know.
Oh, we've lost you. We've lost your sound, Ben.
Oh, sorry. I'm going on a research trip to Bath today to see a lot of my clients, which should be very thirsty work.
I saw on the TV a lot of London streets being filled with tables and things. I suppose they've probably shut off half of London's roads just to try and get the place up and running, as it were.
Well, I think it's quite similar in Bath. They've given businesses a lot of road space and shut those roads down, or made them pedestrianised for the moment.
Yeah, might be the way forward. We might find that this has been the what's needed to stimulate more open air, sort of terraces and things.
But for a month's business, the people have spent a lot of money on tables, chairs, tents. A lot of investment there.
Yeah, I don't think it's going to be a month. I think it will carry on at least until the end of the summer, and then they'll start looking at it about whether they start restricting it again or whether they decide it's a way of regenerating the town centres.
Yeah.
Because that's a big issue now, isn't it? Whether I mean, seems to be quite a lot of interest for retail, but we don't know what will happen once people have got over their first first sugar rush, as it were.
Yeah.
Morning, Indranil. Morning, Julian.
Morning.
Jackie.
Morning.
Everybody good? Everybody have good weather now?
Good morning. Good morning. Good
We
morning.
had a bit of frost this morning, though. We had a little bit of frost.
I remember a discussion we had back in the beginning of all the lockdowns, and people were saying about dining outside and everything, and the British weather, and somebody just says, well, the Swiss do it and the Swedish do it, so let's just get the jackets on and sit outside.
Just get a blanket and sort yourself out.
Yeah.
All right, we don't have to do that anymore. Brexit's happened. We don't have to do that now. It's okay.
We still got the weather.
That's
We
true.
still need to. Yeah.
That's true.
Morning, everyone.
Morning,
Morning.
Jan.
Good morning, everyone.
Morning, Nicole.
Morning, all.
Morning, Cameron.
Morning.
Exciting
Barry,
times.
Barry, up in Scotland, I've not been quite up to date. How are they up there? Where are they going at the moment?
We're a couple of weeks behind what's happening in England, Robin. So we just had in the past week the stay-at-home message changed to stay local. Retail, hospitality, everything is still closed at the moment. April the 26th is the next key date north of the border. So we're due a review from the Scottish Government next Tuesday, which should confirm the 26th opening. That'll be similar to what you've got in England at the moment. So it'll be, I guess the big key difference is that on the 26th of April, Scotland's due to go back into our tier system. So we'll have level 1, 2 and 3, because effectively the country currently is all in level 4, which isn't quite as exciting a situation as you have in England, because for tier 3, it means no alcohol served. It means restricted hours, quite heavily restricted hours. So really to get to a semblance of normality, it's really late May that we're looking at north of the border. I have a funny feeling that could be accelerated, but we'll see.
If for once, actually, England's approach actually does prove to be effective, they might push it forward.
It's always been the case throughout this whole thing, Robin, that we've had more of a slow and cautious approach to relaxing things. No, we went into lockdown much more quickly than you did south of the border. We've always had a more slow and cautious relaxation north of the border, and the reality is, I think, the general, I am generalizing here, I think there's still a broad acceptance, a broad agreement across the population in Scotland of, as we would say up here, cock-annie, just go steady and go slow and don't do anything silly. We'll see. The fact we're in the middle of an election campaign up here has nothing to do with it, of course.
Politics never has anything to do with it, does it?
And people will have to get used to a new party as well, Barry, of course. So that needs a little bit of embedding, no doubt.
That's maybe a discussion for another time, Julian.
Now, Julian.
there's a couple of new parties, and well, let's just say it's interesting. We seem to be uncovering some values and beliefs from the 1950s.
So you're coming in line with the England then, are you?
I think one or two people are trying to. And
we seem to have gone back about 40 years so far.
Well, from the polling, they don't seem to be succeeding. So, hey ho.
Right. Anybody got any sort of stories about what's been going on yesterday? Anybody seen anything exceptional? I heard a guy on the pub today who camped out overnight just to get first to the pub yesterday.
I was going to say I had to do a dash to London from the Lake District because I'm an Airbnb host and I've got my first guest arriving today. And the M6 was like Piccadilly Circus. But I heard at 5 o'clock yesterday morning that pubs in Huddersfield were taking guests at 1 minute past midnight the night before last night. And they were saying we're packed out at 1 minute past midnight on a Sunday night.
Yeah. I think the next few weeks is going to be quite busy for those who've been able to open up, regardless of the weather. I think most people are just going to risk it all and put the jackets on, get out there, and let's hope the next stage is as popular once we can actually get people inside the hotels.
Yeah.
So obviously one thing that's one change that this whole pandemic has brought about is the whole issue of what gets done online and what actually gets done in person. And one of the major issues is that's been talked about a lot is conferences and events where large numbers of people have to get together, or not, as it may be. So I thought we'd do a little session today on hybrid events. So I've got a couple of guys in who've got a bit of experience with events and hybrid events, and they'll give us their views and their knowledge on how they think the world will progress moving forward. So without further ado, I'm going to pass over to Matthew Jane. We've also got Hugh Edwards, but first of all, we'll bring in Matthew Jane, and can give us some knowledge on events.
Thanks, Robin. Hello, everybody. As
Hello.
Robin said, and hello to Hugh as well, who will probably join in and disagree with me or agree with me at certain points through my little presentation that I've got for you today. If I'm okay, Robin, I'm going to share my screen.
Just let me double check the... Yeah, should be okay now.
Okay. Confirm that everyone can see that.
Yep.
Yeah, lovely. So I actually have two jobs. My day job is I'm head of operations at the Lowry. That's not the hotel, sorry guys. The actual Lowry Theatre and Art Gallery in Salford Quays, where we're the home of LS Lowry, obviously where the Lowry Hotel got its name from. Unfortunately, I'm actually furloughed from that role at the moment. We've actually kind of, at the moment, we're an HM courts at the moment, Nightingale Courts. So the venue's been taken over and we've got 4 courts in the building at the moment, including one in the theatre. But obviously my second role, or my side hustle, is that I set up a business called Unique Venues of Manchester. It's on the same principle. As you can probably tell, I'm not originally from Manchester. I'm actually a London boy, and I started life in hotels. So I was Radisson Edwardian trained, as they say, or dragged, whichever you prefer. And then into conference centres, and then into Unique Venues. And down in London, I was a member of Unique Venues of London, moved up to Manchester, and there was no Unique Venues of Manchester, so decided to create it. And we work as very much as a membership organisation, and we kind of work with lots of different venues, mainly independents, but obviously also collaborate a lot with hotels, in order to try and promote them to the conference and events market. That's the kind of market we work in. How have I got experience in hybrid events? Well, part of the options that we do for Unique Venues, we created our own small live expo. And as a result of that, obviously last year, something called COVID came along, and obviously we had to pivot slightly, and we decided to really try to kind of showcase what a hybrid event could be. So we moved our live expo into a hybrid, and decided to kind of really kind of take it to town and go conference,
you felt like I did.
Conference and exhibition. And we basically had 18 speakers. We had some were international. Martin Fuller was our keynote speaker from Conference News. We had live speakers, virtual speakers, pre-recorded speakers. We had live attendees, and we actually, what was quite a small regional expo ended up being an international audience on a hybrid event. So that's kind of the learning curve that I went through. We collaborated with a lot of different partners in order to help deliver that, but I'll come on a bit more into that a little bit later, hopefully. But a lot of people have been saying, you know, hybrid, you know, how big is it? What's it going to look like? These are some stats that I've pulled off various reports. that I've managed to find, you know, everything really from 97% through to 64% of people think that hybrid is going to be an important part of the future of meeting and events. So whilst I don't think we can really truly tell until we reopen how big hybrid events are going to be, I think by their very nature of having a live and virtual audience, there's definitely going to be a high proportion that will look for something on that side of things. Let's not forget the trends that are happening within our industry. It's not just about hybrid. You know, there's a lot of things that I know we've on this forum have discussed. Certainly sustainability, safety and security, and, you know, in flexible terms are going to be really important for the M&E market in order to reopen. Hybrid is just one of those kind of key aspects that I think we should be looking at. In terms of understanding hybrid events, we have now started working with a number of venues to try and help support them. Try not to step on the toes of the wonderful selling savvy team who focus on the sales side. We look at the operational delivery a lot more. And we put together a small kind of package for venues to help them understand hybrid a little bit better. So this is the kind of format that we kind of look at for them so that they can get an understanding of hybrid events. I'm not going to go through all of this with you today, but just touch on a few of the kind of really key points that I think as venues and obviously hotels that we kind of really should be looking at internally. Obviously, in terms of what a hybrid event is, I'm not going to dwell too much on that. I think we all know now what that is. But what I would say is there's plenty of information available about hybrid events online. There's some really good kind of simple kind of process plans that you can Google and find very easily. One of my favorites is the business narrative, Sasha, who created the 6 gears of approach to virtual events, which is the same for hybrid. So plenty of reference points for us to use to kind of really get a better understanding of that. Ultimately, hybrid events, in my view, you know, there's a lot been said. Bill Gates said content is king. The incredible Mary Smith said that means engagement is queen. A lovely lady called Julia Tripp, who's very big in the M&E industry, added that delivery was also queen. So my view is that makes venues the palaces that they all reside in. So, and that can obviously include hotels. And obviously Hugh would probably turn around and say that the platforms which he focuses on are the virtual venues and therefore also palaces. In order to try and get people to understand a little bit more about kind of the different styles of hybrid events, because hybrid is a very generic name for a lot of different types of events, we created a little key to give you a kind of concept of how that might look like. A conference might be a speaker with an audience in a venue. Zoom call is 2 people interacting online. Hybrid presentation may be an international speaker online speaking to a group of delegates in a venue. Might be a little bit more complex by having a speaker that's in a studio that's speaking to a group of people in a venue, but also an audience online. If we look at UVM Expo, we had an awful lot of interactions with exhibitors, speakers, online in a venue, pre-recorded studio works, etc. I suppose my point is that we can go from the very simple to the very complex when it comes to hybrid. So what should we as venues be looking at? I think we need to be looking at our internal infrastructures. That's kind of one of the key areas, because with the infrastructure, hybrid events can happen. That's even before we consider collaboration with audiovisual and production partners and platform partners. If we've got that infrastructure right, broadband, it's not so much about the Wi-Fi anymore, it's about plugging in, and obviously hotels are absolutely suited for that, but ensuring that you've got that ability to be able to plug in to a broadband network is going to be really important. There's a lot of tech that's involved in hybrid events, and obviously power is something that is going to be needed, but obviously with LED lighting and the such like, power requirements aren't quite what they used to be. Space is something, obviously, in terms of safety and security anyway, is going to be of paramount, but also important when it comes to delivering hybrid. Equipment now, in terms of the venue partners that we work with, there's a real variance in the type of equipment and the level of equipment that they have. If you've seen in the cultural sector, there's been quite a bit of funding made available so that arts and cultural organizations can start delivering digital content. And that means a lot of them have actually invested in camera equipment and vision mixers and equipment that can readily deliver hybrid events. So unique venues do have a slight advantage now on being able to deliver that potentially in-house with an increase in knowledge and skill. In terms of delivering it, obviously, it is important that you've got the resource and the people to be able to deliver it. So assessing what you have in terms of that. And again, you know, the traditional single-day conference is possibly going to pivot quite significantly, where certainly there's going to be a lot of access needed in order to set up the technical equipment. Rehearsals is going to be far more. So the way that we're selling the space and the time that we're allocating to it is going to be quite different as well. And other things to consider, again, more probably associated with venues in terms of internal demand, as I touched on with some of the work that the arts and cultural sector is certainly doing. I think it's about confidence of your team to be able to deliver that. And is it your business strategy? You know, we're working with a venue that their strategy is to actually avoid hybrid events. They don't see it as a market that they want to engage with, and that's absolutely fine. But obviously, it's something to consider when you're looking at where you think hybrid is going. What we've then done is kind of create an ability for venues to look at the best way that they can partner up and collaborate. So you've done your infrastructure report, you've looked at your venue, you looked at the rooms you have, and bear in mind, each room can offer a different type of hybrid event. So we're working with a venue in London that has a number of small meeting rooms, and they're engaging by simply a small acquisition of some webcams and laptops in order to provide that engagement in smaller meeting rooms. So it doesn't have to be a massive investment when we're talking about this side of things. They also have some larger spaces in that same venue, and we've looked at a kind of a mobile system that could be used in a number of different spaces at any one time. So, like I say, it's looking at all those elements. Then from there, you've got to also understand what the client's needs are, you know, and these clients, you know, from what my venues that I work with are reporting, again, are really varied in terms of their requests. They don't fully understand the hybrid market as much as we probably think that they might. And that's not being disrespectful to them, because it's just new to all of us in terms of the technology side. So, you know, one of the fundamental questions is whether or not the client is bringing their own production or not, because obviously that can also impact on the decision you make in terms of the way that you collaborate. Then we look at the different ways that you could potentially collaborate. Obviously, as I talked about, a lot of cultural venues in-house is an option for them. A lot of outsourcing to AV partners has been done historically. I know, again, on the forum, we've talked about that outsourcing and third-party side of things. There's been the rise of the hybrid studio. You've seen it in the hotel market. You've seen it in the conference center market. You've seen it in the audio-visual market, where they've turned their warehouses into a studio. This is something that is kind of basically being done on a hire or lease basis, and something that could quite easily be considered. Or it could be as simple as working with a list of preferred suppliers. You know, again, that same kind of outsourcing. Again, each one has different costs. Each one has different options, whether you want to purchase equipment, lease equipment, hire equipment. And it's really about what best fits your venue based on your assessment. So a nice way, and then just going back, feeding back, and just checking on what you can deliver. This is just a small example of what we looked at in terms of the venue that we were working with. we looked at the infrastructure, we looked at the equipment, the support that each one could have, and then look at the best way that they could deliver hybrid events. Yeah, and obviously it was quite varied across certain spaces. We didn't actually need to do anything. Certain spaces, the infrastructure was poor, so we focused on that aspect. And other areas, they had a certain element of audiovisual equipment. We were just adding to that to support their ability to be able to deliver them on that side of things. So what I'd say for hotels is exactly the same position as venues. Look at the rooms that you have, look at the facilities you have, and look at how best you can deliver hybrid on that aspect. And that's really all I've got to say on hybrid, on how it can best work with venues. I'll probably now pass over to Hugh to see if he has anything further that I've missed, but also to talk, the one area that I've probably not talked about, which is something we also do with venues, is talk about platforms. I'll pass over to Hugh.
Thank you, Matthew. Lovely presentation. I do not have a presentation that's anywhere near as pretty, but I'm going to talk to you all the same. So it's nice to meet you all. My name's Hugh Edwards. I am the CEO of Reattendance, which up until this point was an online events platform. The history of Reattendance came about 4 or 5 years ago when we started creating it, and it came out of necessity because we run events ourselves. So I have a sister company, which is this company, in fact, Gravy for the Brain, and that is a voiceover training company, and we run, as many of you would do, just standard kind of conferences in physical environments in London. And originally, Reattendance was all about, it was kind of like an iPlayer for the events industry. Much like you see iPlayer do, it was an on-demand replay style thing. And we changed that at the beginning of the pandemic to be a fully kind of online events platform. And I think one thing that I want to just clear up is that we don't use the word virtual, because there is nothing virtual about the events that happen online. You know, they're real human beings delivering real events, real topics, and they are not virtual things, they're online events. So I think that's the first thing I wanted to say, is that online is the word that we are using, and I think that's important. But what we did was we in October last year, me and Peter Dixon, who's my business partner, we came to a very important conclusion and a very difficult decision to make, which was basically that the future, although there was this huge uptake because of the pandemic of online events, the future isn't online eventing, or at least it might be in some specific areas. The future really is hybrid eventing. And the reason for that is that there are huge amounts of advantages for just in-person physical events in the traditional sense that we have. And then there are huge advantages for online events. And what happened with the pandemic is that we, as event owners and event runners, we were forced through the eye of a needle that we didn't want to have to go through. But having gone through that and having had to do online events, we've seen the advantages for what they actually are. So if we look at a physical event, and this next little section I want to talk about is basically going to justify why I think online events are the way forward. But what we did was we said, okay, we're going to start again at Reattendance, and we're going to completely redesign it from the bottom up and recode it just for hybrid events. So our new platform version 4 comes out in mid-May, and it is a true hybrid event platform. So that's the advert over. Now I'll talk to you about what actually it's all about. So if we have a look at physical events, in-person events, we know that this has serious advantages over online events. And I mean, who would have thought that we needed to have a label, right, in-person events, if we go back a year? But we do. And so the first thing is that they are tactile. So, you know, you can taste, you can smell, you can see people, you can see reactions, and you can see the whites of people's eyes. And that's really important when it comes to eventing and our audience. And we can see the audience when we're actually delivering content, and you're standing there on a stage, you know immediately whether the audience is warm to you and whether you're connecting with them. And you can change your presentation, your delivery style, literally. I mean, I'm looking at you all now and I can see you're all looking at me and kind of relatively engaged. You know what's happening. Then we have the sales aspect and the expo floor, which I think has been a very difficult time over the pandemic, and expos have been quite difficult for people to get right, because the sales part of an expo is not just about, here's my product, do you want to buy it? It's about engagement and connection and being able to read people's body language and, you know, all the things that we know. And sometimes it's the queue for the coffee machine where you meet people and you have the best interactions, and that can be quite hard to replicate. And then, you know, applause. It's so important to people. Having direct feedback from an audience is why physical events are really, really important. So you might say, okay, well, why bother with online events? Well, let's go and look at the benefits of online eventing. Firstly, and I realize I'm talking to a room full or a Zoom full of hoteliers. So I think you're going to have to bear with me a second here. But online is cheaper. I mean, there is no doubt. You know, to put an event online is a cheaper thing to do because hotels, you know, justifiably are expensive. The second thing that we get, though, from online is we get analytics. And this can't be underestimated, the power of analytics and using them properly. So, for example, we can see exactly down to just one person what their entire journey through an event is and how long they stay in specific events and how much they're engaging, how much content they're actually consuming down to the second. We can see where they've been. If it's a CPD kind of issue, we can see whether they actually have consumed different bits of information. Crucially, we can see where people haven't been. We can see how much they've engaged in polls and Q&As and how much they like things, how much they feed back. And why is that important? Well, that's important because it means we can change things as the event is actually happening. And we see this quite a lot at the events that are being run on reattendance, where people are watching the analytics and then making changes to their event to guide it and shape it in a different way. And that can be, it can be done in a physical sense, but it's harder to do in a physical sense because, I mean, we all know the pain of trying to get people to fill in those little surveys or bits of paper at the end of a session. You know, some people are quite happy to, but the vast majority of them don't fill in. And then there's a time gap between getting that survey back from people about how much they like that particular session, and then collating all that information and saying, okay, well, we did have a good response here, or we had feedback that we could have used, but it's 3 hours out of date, or whatever it may be. So analytics are really, really important. Then another benefit that online brings us, which Matthew touched on, is geography. What we've seen is a complete breakdown of international borders with online events, and the amount of people. I mean, with our own One Voice conference that we run, when we did our first one in May, we moved that to online. We went from having people from 2 countries to 27 countries, and the audience figures were so much bigger. And the feedback that we had was because, yes, because of the pandemic, because they wanted to come to the event anyway, but also from people who had said that they loved the fact that this was online because they just couldn't afford to have come to this event anyway, had it been going on physically, because, you know, there was a $500 airfare and there was 4 nights in a hotel and food and whatever. And when you put the whole package together, it's a £1,500 outlay instead of what was actually a £150 ticket. So the borders have been broken down, and following that, all, you know, our platform and my competitors, we have translated our platforms. So they now work in other languages as well, and they can be live subtitled. And we even have some events that run where people, where we vision mix in signers for the deaf community. So all of these things can be done. Then, of course, we have people's time. And one of the things that's quite an interesting point that happened during the pandemic is that people started to reevaluate their lives, and actually they're not happy anymore to go, and, you know, their work-life balance has changed, and so they're They're not happy to go and leave their families for 4 days to go to an event when they can still spend time with their family and not have to drive 200 miles to go to an event or whatever it is. And that has a knock-on effect, of course, on our planet and the climate, and the fact that the carbon footprint of events is actually very high. Now, I mean, again, I realize I'm talking to everybody who is invested in physical events, but it can't be underestimated, you know. And if you think of something like, you know, a 1,000-person event, the carbon footprint of that, if you consider maybe 20 people taking flights and then an average round trip distance of 100 miles for people, some people will be closer, some people will be further. And then you start looking at the carbon footprint. We're talking in excess of 10 metric tons of carbon for that one event. And that's actually quite scary, because that's down on us. You know, we tend to ignore that kind of thing, but it's important to think about. And then we have the idea of on-demand and replays. It's the way that we consume content now, the Netflix generation, it's just changed. You know, people rarely use scheduled content nowadays. If you look at, you know, how many people look at the BBC and ITV or whatever, most people nowadays consume Netflix and Prime, and they make choices about how and when they want to actually go and watch these things. And often that is not in a scheduled, defined way. And one of the really interesting things that we noticed at reattendance, in fact, it was pointed out to us by our longest standing client, who we've had for 5 years, who was there from the very beginning. He turned around to me and he said, do you realize that we've now got the largest global library of professional game development talks in the world, and we are now starting to resell that, and they've got something amazing like 800 hours worth of content, and it's just from having compiled that over their events. So what we're seeing is people reusing the content, and the long tail, as we like to call it, of ROI that happens with these events because of the on-demand nature is very surprising. You know, people really engage with content long after the event has finished, and it's still saleable. So it has real value to it. And now gone are the days of just one single day's worth of ROI, which was your actual event. Now that ROI goes on long into the future, and you can still leverage that in the future. We also have the idea of risk, and risk is hugely mitigated with online. So, I mean, nobody wants physical events to go away. We want them to stay, and we want them to come back. But the fact is, we don't really know what's going to happen in the future about, you know, different waves. And yeah, I'm of the opinion that we've pretty much got this one covered now. We've got our vaccines. It's going to go back to the way it was, which is a good thing. But we don't know what's going to happen in the future with other diseases or the public perception about interaction. We don't know what's going to happen with that yet. So if you've planned in an online component to your event, your risk is mitigated, because no matter what happens, if you have to, you can fall back to the online event only, and the event can still go ahead. And that's where so many of us got caught out last February, where all of a sudden, oh my God, we can't do this event anymore. You know, it was a horror show for so many of us. And the final point, just regarding online, is that we now have unlimited capacity. So no longer are we governed by the fact that we have a fire limit in our hotel room. So kind of looking at the scales, the balance there, we have really, really good reasons and justifiable reasons for wanting physical events, and they're all valid. But we also have really good reasons for wanting online components, and they're all valid as well. And the nuts and bolts of this is, if I said to you, and this is kind of, I guess, the key message I want to say to you guys, is to not be scared of the online component just because you guys are venues or hotels. This is an addition to what you're doing, and it's going to increase your ROI. So if I said to you, look, you can run a physical event and that gives you 100% profit. But if you can add another 50% profit or another 100% profit on top of that by running the online component, wouldn't it make sense to do so? The answer is, of course, yes, it absolutely would make sense to do so. So I'm aware that I'm kind of slightly overrunning on my time, but I'm going to just touch on one last little subject if I can. Is that all right, Robin?
Yeah, carry on. We're good for time.
Good,
a couple of questions, but we're fine. Carry on.
Okay. So I'll do this quite quickly then. So I can tell you what hybrid events is not. And hybrid events is not sticking a webcam in a corner of a room and then just broadcasting it. Yes, that is one way out, but we can just do so much better than that, you know? And so what a good hybrid event would be is finding a way to make the online component, the online audience, as interactive and as engaged as the physical present audience, and that component as well. Now, that's not always going to be easy to do. And sometimes you may want to separate the streams. So for example, you might want to have an online social event that's different to your physical social event, because with the best will in the world, I can't imagine many people wanting to be at a bar and holding a phone up and talking to someone whilst they're talking to someone else. It's just not going to work. But there's no reason you can't still have an online social for those people in however way that actually happens. And the same thing needs to happen for the audience. Now, I mean, I would be an advocate of having just one app that runs both of your components, your physical and your online. And that is why we're redeveloping Reattendance to be hybrid ready, so that your audience at the same time can all be asking questions in one place, or all be polling in the same place, or all be looking at the schedule in the same place, or all talking to your online event help in the same room, and so on and so forth. So it's the same experience for everybody. So that's how we would do it. Then I think we need to look at the event design itself. How are we going to design in the interaction of the online component and asking questions and bringing them into the actual room, rather than just putting a webcam and broadcasting it outwards? And these questions are things that are going to have to be asked for each individual event, because they're all different. You know, everyone's event is different. So there is demand for both. And as Matthew touched on, it can't be underestimated how important your internet connection is. It is so crucial, because it is your one blocker to the world. So when you're testing your internet, make sure that you're testing your internet when you've got a full event or when you've got a full hotel. Because if you go and test your internet connection and you get a nice 20 meg upload speed when there's no one there, on the day there's plenty of people there and that goes down to half a meg, you're screwed. And it means you've just sold tickets to 10,000 people who can't watch your event, and you're in big trouble. So, you know, you need to make sure that your internet is ring fenced in its bandwidth, so that you, as the streaming component of that, you are guaranteed your upload speed. And it doesn't matter what anyone else does, they can't impact that internet connection. It's hugely important. And for everybody here who owns a venue, now is the time to start investing in that technology, because that is how you're going to sell hybrid to your clients, by guaranteeing them upload speed, and by not, I mean, okay, this isn't really my call to make, but my advice would be to not charge people through the nose for it. You know, yes, charge them, but don't make it prohibitive. You know, this has got to be something that is as standard as having tables for people to be able to put their kit on. This has got to be really, you know, embedded in what you do. And because your ROI is so much more increased, whether you're the hotel and you're running events yourselves at your events, or whether you're bringing other people in, don't be scared. Don't see this as a threat. This isn't a threat to hotels or venues. This is an enhancement. And all we're doing is just changing the way that things are working. So see this as an opportunity rather than a threat, and I think you're going to be fine. I could go on. I've got plenty more I could talk about, but we kind of are at the end of the time, and I don't want to go over Robin's allotted time. So thank you for listening.
So Q, one question that's come up here, and I think you've slightly answered it, but is it a case that you've got the platform supplier and the AV supplier at the moment? Is it?
Well, from Reattendance's point of view, we offer both, and they are distinct, separate things. Some of our events companies, our event owners, want to do everything themselves, and that's absolutely fine. So they use the platform as the online component, and the future platform as the hybrid component as well. Some people like us to vision mix and run the events for them. So we've plenty of bookings for all of this year for physical elements as well. I think the AV companies are always going to be a requirement for a hybrid event, and as they are in physical events. And how long that piece of string is determined by you and how, you know, what kind of event you're running. I think it's just important that in the future, the two work together. So, you know, the AV company and the either the physical vision mixing or the online mixing is done in sympathy with each other. And then I think things are going to work. What we're seeing already is that most of the AV companies are contacting us to ask advice on how they should get ready for these events in hybrid, because clearly we as a company can't service all of our clients. There's way too many. So I think, I think they're going to be separate, but the AV companies are very aware of what's happening, and they're learning the ropes. So whether you're managing it yourself or whether your AV company is managing it or whether we are running it, it's completely up to you, but they will go hand in hand.
So if imagine you're doing like the typical exhibition where you've got people milling around desks with people going to them and everything. How does that adapt to, how do you deal with that on the online situation?
Well, I mean, if you're talking about networking, then, I mean, do you mean networking or do you mean the expo floor?
The expo floor sort of thing. How does?
Yeah, well, I mean, my platform and my competitors' platform, they all in their current incarnations do the same sort of thing, which is basically allow video calling between people. And that's okay. But I think the approach has not been great online as an overview for the pandemic across all of the platforms. And I'm not going to give too much away, but we're trying to redesign that for our version 4 platform. What I would say is that the networking part is one of the toughest pieces to crack. Not only because they are different things in a physical sense and an online sense, but also because they have different entry points and different requirements. So if you look at physical events, there are physical events that are designed well, and the event owners have designed in good networking opportunities for people. And that doesn't happen by accident, it happens by good event design. And the same thing is said for online event design. So for example, we recommend that on the online space, what you don't do is leave the expo open for the entire day. What you do instead is you have a focused amount of time within your schedule, if it's a conference that is, where you've got both, for the actual expo floor to happen. You get focused time. And what then happens is that the expo owners aren't sitting there all day with no one calling because you've got competing schedules going on at the same time, or keynote speeches or whatever happening at the same time. You're focusing the audience's attention into the actual expo floor on the online component. And sometimes that falls on deaf ears, and sometimes people do it, and then they feed back that the expo wasn't really successful, and sometimes they pay attention to it and they focus their time and they get much better results. So I think it's just about good event design, really, Robin.
So almost a selling point is for a hotel, for example, is to say, like, the people who are exhibiting can actually have the time to go and see the conference bit of it in the conference room, and then go back to the expo, as it were, for their other time, which is often what happens is people who are exhibiting don't actually get a chance to see what people are talking about, isn't it?
Exactly. And the same goes for another benefit of the online component is that you can just go and book in meetings with people at specific times, and you get to choose when that is, and the expo owner gets to accept that or reject it or whatever they want to do, which means you can spread your risk and you can spread the time even after the event. It doesn't have to be during the event that those meetings take place. I mean, it can't be underestimated that if you think about traditional online advertising, people are quite happy to go and pay, 5, 10, 20, 30 pounds for a qualified lead on Facebook or Google Ads, because they know that their price per acquisition, they're going to get a lot more value from each individual customer in terms of their ROI and their lifetime for that customer. And so if you focus that down into an expo in an online event and say, okay, we'll just, move the same thing over, and by coming to this expo and paying us whatever it is, £500, and having walked away with 100 qualified leads that you've actually spoken to, there's no real difference there. you know, you've just paid £5 a lead or whatever the sums work out as. So I think it's just about good event design and making sure that the event owners are the expo owners and the expo companies are as looked after and as engaged as your attendees are, because in the end of the day, they're your customers as well.
Can I add to that, Rowan? Just because obviously when we hosted our expo, we had 50% virtual exhibitors and 50% live in-person visitors. Now, we did it on the 1st of October last year, just as we were then limited to 30 live attendees. But we had over 300 virtual attendees. So obviously for the live exhibitors, only having 30 attendees and having, you know, the way we placed them was in their own private meeting rooms so that they could then engage with the individuals. But they had to do most of the kind of online, most of the kind of networking online. And obviously they accessed that through the platform. And just to kind of clarify a bit about platforms and as well, that again, it's a bit like the word hybrid. It's used as a multitude of things. Platform can also be used as a multitude of things. Zoom here is a peer-to-peer platform, you know, but it's not reattendance by any stretch of the imagination because of what it can do. You've also got streaming platforms, you know, things like StreamYard have really, you know, popped up as an option whereby you're using that as a streaming platform, and then Facebook becomes almost the hosting platform, which again, I would never claim that Facebook is anywhere near what the kind of complexity and amazing work that reattendance does. So the interaction of the exhibitors was all predominantly done through the platform, and is important that, you know, we got stats reporting that the amount of engagement by those that really made an effort, and bear in mind my exhibitors were venues, those ones that made real effort to engage with that audience, which they could do through the virtual platform, they were making hundreds of contacts. You know, those that didn't really engage with the platform weren't really getting much. So, you know, the effort that you make when on a hybrid event and you're only virtual, you've got to make a big effort to make those contacts. So I think it's the work ethic of your BDMs on those kind of events that really can tick. And if I may just go back to the equipment, AV supplier and platform side of things, as Hugh kind of touched on, we work with a video production company very closely, and we actually use reattendance as the platform so that we do, they are able to offer that kind of one-stop shop of a platform and the AV. However, you know, as I mentioned, there's so many different types of platform, yeah, that certain hybrid events don't need you know, Hugh's level, no disrespect to you, but you're not needed for everything. And they might not even need AV support if you've got a little bit of in-house knowledge. But then as you kind of step up in size and complexity, that's when you start introducing the AV companies. And that's when you start, you know, the more complex is when you're really starting then talking about the kind of what I class as the hosting platforms on that side of things.
Can I also just mention something on pricing and pricing your tickets? Because as soon as you do your first hybrid event, you've immediately got the question that has to be asked of how to actually go and price the online component and the physical component. And I mean, that is down to everybody, but there's just a couple of pointers I would give you. The first one is that your physical event can't be priced too high against your virtual one, because otherwise people are motivated to make a choice based on price. And the second thing is that the price that you set has to reflect the actual value of the conference rather than the worth of the ticket price. And they're two slightly separate things. So for us, we've priced ours at, I think it's for the One Voice conference in August, which is happening both in the UK and in the States. That is going at £300 for the physical price and £200 for the online component. And we arrived at that price basically because the amount of the DDR and the delegate day rate and the food and all that kind of stuff of the hotel we took that off, and then what was remaining was basically that. So the value and the worth of the content itself can't be underestimated and has to be shown to be still valuable. So if you put a hybrid price up against a physical price, and you say, okay, you know, our physical ticket is 500, but our online ticket is only 50, you've got problems, because nobody's going to come to the physical one. So it is a balancing act that you need to think about.
And one thing that's occurring to me with you guys talking is we have the wedding coordinators in the hotels and in the things. Are we now going to see a new breed of hybrid event coordinators, somebody who is an expert on not only going online and almost dealing with the people online, as well as actually being there physically? Is that something that's going to be almost a new position within these areas, these buildings?
Yeah, I would say so, and I think rightly so. You know, I mean, I expect it to probably be the same people who are just retooling. I mean, you got to think that the online component is just another skill set, and what we're really talking about is events. And you know, all the event designers and event owners out there have the skills for this, so they're just learning it's just putting a new arrow to their bow, so to speak.
But obviously, these people will need a specific kind of training to you almost need one in the room and another one online, don't you? You sort of, so you've got somebody who's moderating and keeping things alive on the online scenario, while yeah, you've got the other person running around making sure everybody's happy in the site. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, if you're just treating all of your, and this comes back to the you know, idea of not calling things virtual, because there's nothing virtual about your attendees, their customers. Whether they're in the room or whether they're on the online component, you want them all to be happy. So as long as you're treating your customers as customers, then, you know, it doesn't matter whether you do that online or whether you do it in a physical sense. So yeah, I completely agree. You would dedicate separate resources to go and look after each set of people.
We actually had two, Robin. We actually had one that was focused on the actual delivery of the actual conference. So making sure that what we were filming live in the room was also coming across on the actual platform in terms of the stream, but also someone that was also engaging with that audience as well, so that when there were questions coming up, making sure that they were fed to, you know, the kind of speakers and the panelists, and to myself, to make sure that I knew what was kind of going on and what the online audience, as Hugh said, it was actually questioning and saying, and making sure that that was also incorporated into the event, because you have got those two audiences. So one that was focused just on the virtual audience, and one that was just looking at the actual delivery of the online presentation and conference. So yes, there's definitely that. And in venues, we probably, if there is there's something that we probably will need to look at, a skills gap in terms of our understanding of that. You know, coordinators will need, you know, events coordinators will need to understand what the questions are that are being asked of them, so that they can interpret them and be able to respond to them.
I can tell you one thing that is coming, actually, which is a resource that might be useful. We've created a 34 module training course on hybrid events, which we're going to release at the same time as our V4 platform. And we're going to make that completely free to the industry, so that you can all just jump on and truly immerse yourself in what hybrid is and how you start to design your events.
Mm-hmm. I've got a question from Ben. He says, what are the internet speeds we should be looking at? And I suppose it's true. I mean, is there like a minimum that you would need to think about to do one of these events?
Yeah, so perfect streaming is around 2.4 megabit per second, which probably isn't something you're used to hearing. What that effectively means is when you do your speed test, at your internet, you want to be at least 10 megabytes on the upload speed. The download speed will be much higher, because that's the way that ISPs balance them. But you've got to have a 10 meg upload, and that is per stream. So if you've got 3 streams running, then you need to have capacity for those to actually run. The 2.4 megabits per second would make you think that if your upload speed is more than 2.5, you're going to be okay. But the reality is that they ebb and flow. And so we would recommend 10 megabits upload plus.
So if you're a big event space that's got several of these going on, you're looking about sort of 100 megabytes or more. You're looking at a very powerful.
Yeah, I mean, we've got a T1 line here, which is 1,000 megabits up and down. So I mean, by necessity we need that, but it's not all that expensive, you know. And you know, for whatever it is, 200 or 300 quid a month, you can get the same fiber put into your venue, and you're lightning then. And let's be honest, the use of online is going to just get more and more and more as time goes on. So you're not investing in something that's going to be redundant in the future. You're investing in something that's going to grow in the future. So I would say now's the time to do it.
And if you're doing that investment, make sure you add a petitionable element to it. So if you are a multi-roomed venue where you can do multiple events, that you want to allocate a certain proportion of that to each one of those events. And then also don't forget the delegates, because as much as I said, you'll need to plug in for the hybrid event. That's for the platform and the audio, the camera operators and that to all plug in to make sure that works. Your delegates are still going to need that Wi-Fi. As Hugh touched on, the live attendees are still going to be on their phones and tablets interacting with that platform as part and parcel of the event. So you're almost going to need double that, so that you've got your Wi-Fi for your delegates and your plug-in for your actual conference. Making sure that can be sectioned into rooms and into that kind of dedicated for the actual hybrid event and for your Wi-Fi for your delegates is going to be really important.
Yeah, it's worth mentioning. I mean, both myself and Matthew have been talking about hardwired internet. And the reason that that's important is that with Wi-Fi, the further you are from your Wi-Fi router, the slower the connection speed, and the more things that can go wrong. And it changes with environmental conditions, whether if it's really hot, your internet speed is different and so on. And it's not particularly reliable when you're streaming, and you have to guarantee that stream goes out. Otherwise, your audience just can't see your event. Hardwired is the way to go. So if you need to recable your venues again, now is the time to make that investment.
I know Barry's it's not related, but it is related. Barry's just mentioned that the Edinburgh Festival is going to go on this year. Can we imagine an Edinburgh Festival, which is people being there, milling around and everything, and yet another 1,000 people connecting from around the world to see these things, all these different events going on?
Well, I would ask you why we wouldn't do that. I mean, I'm not being facetious, but at the moment we can't fly anywhere, so people often travel from Europe to the Edinburgh Festival. It's a fantastic festival. Why would we not offer that? And just from a purely selfish ROI point of view, if you can sell more tickets, then surely it makes sense to do. They're going to be filming it anyway, so why not broadcast it anyway in a secure, ticketed way?
Yeah.
And once you get your head around that kind of notion, all of our events are open to this, right? And this is why we took that decision to go and start again with reattendance, because for all the best will in the world, sticking the word hybrid on my website isn't going to cut it. We need an app that's actually going to manage this for us in a real way. So yeah, I mean, and again, this is why I was saying, for all of you who are venue owners, this isn't the enemy. You can't look at this as something that's detracting from hotel room bookings or whatever. This is an advantage for you guys.
Yep, good. Luke's commented about the security issue that we've mentioned about making sure all streams are sort of like separate for different events and making sure that you almost can't get hacked. I suppose it's quite an important aspect of it.
Yeah, and we've seen more and more. Robin, sorry. We have seen quite a significant number of online events that have been targeted for a variety of reasons. from just the general bored 18-year-old kid sat in his room with a laptop, can't do anything, to the more sophisticated state-sponsored hacks against live streamed events and conferences. So it's not just about making sure your connections are segregated, but it's making sure that when you're talking, as Matthew raised, guest Wi-Fi versus event Wi-Fi, that there is a very clear, very strong barrier between the two.
Yeah, and I agree, and I think it's another reason for advocating hardwired internet connections as well, is because you know it's much harder to bounce into them than it is with a Wi-Fi, especially because hotel Wi-Fi is usually relatively open and based on things like room name plus or your surname plus room number. It's pretty easily hackable. But what I would say is that as long as whether you choose ours or whether you choose one of my competitors, just make sure that they have security access in place. So that because one of the other things that a lot of the platforms don't do is make sure that your username and password can't be shared, so that two people can't access it at the same time, because otherwise, that's halving the value of that ticket price and your ROI as well. So yeah, and security is very important, not just for interruptions. We all saw all the sort of Zoom bombing that was happening midway through the pandemic, but also for really important stuff like GDPR and making sure that people's data is properly protected. So you need to make sure that your platform has a decent GDPR policy and that they're accountable for it as well.
Yeah, and that's really key, Hugh. I went to a very well-known hotel brand during lockdown that was and managed to actually access their Wi-Fi router and access some rather sensitive information on their network as part of a test we were asked to do by the hotel chain to see how secure it was. So again, it's just food for thought for those of you that are venue owners and are looking at kind of reconfiguring for these hybrid events.
Indeed, indeed. Right. Well, we've reached the hour as usual. Thank you very much, Matthew and Hugh, for all the advice and all the knowledge. I hope everybody else has enjoyed as much as I have, and I've certainly picked up some good, interesting knowledge to be able to pass on to clients and colleagues, etc. And I think we'll just round it up for today. So thank you very much, and hope to see you all again in 2 weeks' time.
Thank you. Lovely to meet you all.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks very much indeed all. Thank you. Bye for now. Have a great day.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Right.